the Bourbon Friday show, where each week we take a break on Friday, we sample a new bourbon, learn something about it, and we interview somebody interesting from the St. Louis startup community. So this week I am very excited to have Cody Beck from American Hauntings podcast with us today. And we're going to be talking all about some ghost stories, which should be interesting, but especially talking about what he's done to get his podcast up and running. So first of all, Cody, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really sorry you couldn't get anybody interesting, but I'm happy to fill in.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You know, it's good to have a backup we can call in at the very last second.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, third string.
Yeah, so Cody's full of it because we asked him to come on because he has actually got hit a very big milestone for a podcast. So you launched it. It's been less than a year, right?
Yeah, it's been just about a year. We launched American Hauntings podcast. We have about 24 episodes.
Okay.
2 of them are bonus episodes, so 22 regular episodes. We just hit over 100,000 total downloads.
Wow.
We're at about 105 right now.
Really?
And the show's growing bi-weekly. Every time we release an episode, it does a little bit better than the one before. So it's great.
Yeah. That's exactly what you want, right? So that's what we're going to be kind of digging into today is kind of how to launch, how to get to that point, talking about what your longer term goals are. And, I think from my perspective, like we always hear these stories, somebody's already a billionaire and they get interviewed all the time about how did you do it, right? What were the steps you took? And a lot of times by that point, they don't remember a lot of the steps, right? Mm-hmm. And then even if they have useful advice, it's so out of date that it probably doesn't work anymore, right? So in this case, what I'm excited about is this is a year in or even less than a year in. You've seen traction, you've seen some results, you've done some pretty smart things to kind of get things up and running. And I would assume you still remember some of it at least, so you can give us some pointers, right?
So I remember a little bit. It's actually going to be almost a learning experience with me and the audience because we're going to try to figure out together what I did.
What you did right.
Because I have no idea, but you know what? You can too. So we'll figure it out.
Cool. So I have to ask some really deep and pointed questions here. All right. Well, so let's start out by just telling us, how would you define American Hauntings podcast?
Yeah, so American Hauntings. Do I look at you? Do I look at them?
You can go back and forth, yeah.
All right, so American Hauntings podcast, we discuss history, hauntings, legends, and lore. So I grew up in a town called Alton, Illinois. It's right across the river in Illinois. And
Fast Eddie's,
yes,
everybody
knows Fast Eddie's. It's okay. But everybody knows Fast Eddie's. But it also has a lot of history. It's a river town. It was big during the Civil War. It's on the river. It was a very strategic point for a lot of that St. Louis, gateway to the West. There's a lot of history here.
Sure. Okay.
So growing up, I knew that Alton was supposed to be one of the most haunted cities in America.
Oh, really?
And so that's just a thing people say. But there's a lot of history and there's a lot of lore behind that. So I drive by these places all the time and I would wonder, I know that building or that house is supposed to be really haunted.
Yeah.
No idea why though. So I was very curious about, what is the history behind these sort of things? So I started thinking about how can I learn about that? And flashback to, I was about 9 years old. Okay. I wandered into this bookstore and it was a bookstore that had a bunch of ghost books and monster books and all this stuff. Huh. And it was owned by a gentleman named Troy Taylor. And he's an author, he's a historian, does a lot of ghost tours. So that was his store. I bought a book there called The Field Guide to North American Monsters. I still remember it. I still have it. It has Bigfoot on the front, Bigfoot. And went to one of his ghost tours in high school, took me around and taught me a lot about the history of our group, taught us a lot about the history of these buildings. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. Now I have the lore and the legends part, but I also have the historical aspect. So it was about a little more than a year ago. You and I are very the same as far as like we have so many ideas, so many side projects, and you never have enough stuff bogging you down. So I decided, let's launch one more thing. Why not? Toss it on there. And so I wanted to know, why are these places supposedly haunted? And so I started thinking about it. And I was like, I should do a podcast about my hometown. I said, who is better to give me the history lessons than this man named Troy Taylor? So I went over the top. I reached out with a cold email, but I built a website with all of his branding and everything.
Oh, really?
I told him it wasn't live or anything. It was live, but nobody knew it. I bought the domain preemptively. And I basically said, hey, I'm going to do 90% of the work. Here's the benefit for you. Can we meet? And my idea was if I can get a face-to-face with him, I could convince him, let's do this. And we met and we went for it. And he's since then come over where it's much more 50-50. He does a lot of work on it now, and I think he sees some benefit from it. And I've not only learned a lot, and we've launched the second season here in St. Louis, but I mean, I've built a friendship out of it, So it's been great.
That's amazing. So I think that kind of leads to my first, technical question here, so to speak, which is, So this guy you've admired. I mean, you said you were 9 when you first
Yeah.
went into his bookstore,
Yep.
and from what I understand, he's got a decent following online. I mean, he's kind of a famous guy, right?
For sure.
So, it's interesting because I think a lot of people when they want to meet an influencer, they're first of all not sure what to do, and then a lot of times what they end up doing is they just send an email and say, "Oh, hey, can I talk to you?" Right?
Yeah.
And they don't respond to that, right?
Right.
So you approach this completely different. I mean, you actually kind of built out, a bit of a brand for it ahead of time. You kind of knew what you were doing coming in. You had all this research done. Was that something? How did you decide to do it that way?
Sure. So I read a lot from people like Ryan Holiday and Tim Ferriss. They were 2 big influences in this. And I mean, it's just name dropping, but they have great advice when it comes to this. And the thought was provide as much value for him up front as I possibly can. Make it a no-brainer for him. Nice. So if he had not had the time, like there's nothing I can do about that, right? Yeah. If he wanted to make the time, he could, but that's a wall you just can't really cross. But for me, it was pretty much show him the benefit up front, do what they would call free work and provide value up front and knowing that it probably won't work out. I was nervous as hell to send the email. I rewrote it 10 times. Because I didn't know, is this too long? There's a lot of detail, but I don't want it to be too short. Sure. I agonized over this way more than I should have, but I wanted to provide value for him up front and make it a no-brainer for him. So, and I really, like I said, I wanted to get in front of him. If I can get an audience that's halfway there at least. Of course, yeah. So I sent the email. He said, yeah, sure, let's meet for lunch. I met with him and his business partner, and the rest is history. And, I try all the time to just show him that, not like now I said it's fun, we have a friendship and everything, but before then I was just like, hey, I want to help promote your stuff and get it out there to a wider audience. Yes, I want to learn. I'm not just being altruistic here. I have something to gain, but I'm trying to show you that it's worth it to do more for you.
Wow, that's amazing. So I think that, and actually that's something we in our business have really benefited from in the past year or so is strategically finding influential people, right? So no matter what marketplace you're in, there's always somebody that's considered kind of the leader who has the most influence, right? And we can measure these things now. We have social media followings. You can look at how many people are following them. But then doing things for them for free, right? As you said, free work, right? Yep. So finding ways to really, without any request up front, just reach out and say, hey, I've got this stuff for you. Or, I know Gary Vee talks a lot about, the guy who does all this video work, D-Rock,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And he just reached out and was like, man, I love your stuff. I really want to make some free videos for you. I think I can do some cool things for you, right? Yeah. And that's turned into a, lifelong partnership. And he does all his video work now. For sure. So, so that's, I think that's something that, did you have a backup? Was there another guy who would have reached out to if this didn't work? Or?
No, absolutely not. So the idea was, even when I reached out to Troy's written over 100 books about various subjects, a lot of them in this area, a lot of them not, a lot of them on very specific topics that are, kind of more widespread. But when I reached out to him, I even said like, hey, I'll write. I had an idea for the structure of the show, and I was like, I'll write all your parts. You just have to read them. Oh, wow. And that was me taking a leap because, one, he already has his stuff written for the most part. Two, he's a much better writer and speaker than I am. Sure. But not gone as far. But this is one of those things where I was like, I'm going to do this. Yeah. I don't know how long it's going to last. But I didn't really have a backup plan. You know, I still would have done it, but it wouldn't have lasted as long. But I mean, like, it's that cliche. I'm going to talk a lot about cliches here, but I'm going to tell you the ones I like, and then I'm going to kind of go against the ones I don't like. But if you don't ask, the answer is no. Yeah. So I asked, and it worked out. For the 99 times it didn't. This one time it did. Yeah, that's great. And I think that since you only had the one, it sounds like you put a lot into it, right? Oh, all the eggs in one basket. Yeah. It was all ready to go. So I think one point I just want to make for the audience here, because I think if I was watching this, I would be thinking, great, but does this mean none of the advice I hear after this is useful unless I find some already famous person to be on the show? And I think that a variation of this that I've seen and that I've done in some of the stuff we've created is not necessarily having a co-host, but then requesting people to come on the show for a single episode. For sure. So doing more of an interview format and having different people come on, but each of them brings their own influence, right? So if you get the right people on the show in that context, you can also get that same kind of benefit, right? And I did think about, all these different places that Troy and I talk about on the podcast. I thought about, okay, well, I could bring in the guy that owns that building now, and I could bring in the person that lived there. So I guess there were kind of contingency plans, but yeah, I didn't exactly know what I was doing. But yeah, there's always a way to hack it. And I even thought about, okay, if this podcast doesn't work, I'll start a podcast about people that run podcasts. You know, like I was like, I'm just going to do this and I'm going to find a way.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's a lot of people that are. I mean, we have a little bit of an elaborate setup for this show. You know, we've been adding to it over time, but I know that there are a lot of people who have, you know, they have like an app on their phone, right? I think there's a Stitcher is one of them, right?
Yeah.
And it's like you can just get your phone and just talk into it, right? And you can just create a podcast that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's a good point. Just get going, just try something out, right? So the next thing I want to ask you about, kind of the technical stuff here, is talk about how to get an influencer on the show. Tell us about your setup. So do you have a lot of equipment that you do for this, or how do you record the podcast?
Yeah, my setup would make most audio engineers weep.
Yeah.
It's so unprofessional and just on the go, and I make it work. So we have kind of a reverse problem from a lot of people. So when we started out, we went to a recording studio called Lighthouse Sounds in Alton.
Okay.
And it was a lot of friends that I had. It was in an older building where there was a death of a bartender. It was very appropriate for our show, right?
Got it.
And I recorded with them, and they have great equipment, and it sounded amazing. We didn't know what we were doing. It was our first few episodes, but it sounded great. And then we realized we wanted to be more flexible, be more mobile with the show, be able to record it where we wanted to. Okay. And we had a very candid conversation with the guys at the show, and they were like, look, we can do podcasts, no problem. But they're like, you guys don't necessarily need us to do your stuff. I'm not recording 32 track, album. Yeah. So they've been really helpful with helping me figure stuff out and everything. But I did realize that there was a huge learning curve. Not only was you can get the nicest equipment in the world. If you don't know what you're doing, it doesn't matter. It's like giving me the most expensive guitar in the world. I can't just shred right then,
Clapton, right?
Exactly. So it takes a lot of time. So it's been a lot of YouTube University. It's been a lot of hitting up my friends and trial and error and just pounding my fists on the table and trying to figure stuff out. So the setup we have right now, we have two Shure SM58s that I'm pretty sure we used in high school for our bands and stuff like that. I mean,
this is like the Tim Ferriss microphone, the thing you can beat the crap out
of.
Oh,
yeah. That thing's.
I think he uses the same for his podcast,
been through some stuff.
Yeah.
It's been through some stuff. So we have that, and then we have for the mixer. What we're using, it's a Tascam DP008, which has a lot of features and functionality on as far as mixing goes. But I don't use any of that because I think honestly it was built by audio engineers, or it was built by like technical people and not people that practically use it. It's a small screen. It's really hard to use, but I use that to record stuff, and then I run it all through and I mix it and master it in GarageBand, which is a free program. If you have a Mac. And so we had the reverse problem where our first 4 episodes sounded awesome. The content, we didn't have a flow yet, but the recording sounded great.
Okay.
And then it just took a nosedive after that because I was recording my own stuff, and it's gotten better each time. And then I've run into new problems. Some of them sound terrible because there's been an air conditioner on, and I didn't think about that. Or my microphone was too far away, or a cell phone was interfering. Like, there's been so many things that you learn after the fact.
Yeah.
But I will say, if I had waited until I felt like I had the audio down, I still would not have started yet because I still don't feel comfortable doing it. I know how to press the buttons. I know how to make a recording, but I don't know how to make a recording, But I get a little bit better each time. Most of the people that comment on the podcast say, hey, your audio sucks. You should stop all this stuff. That minority is always the loudest voice. But then I get 1 or 2 emails. It's like, hey, I love what you're talking about. I grew up here, or this is really interesting. I'm really glad that you take this approach. And that right then just like reinvigorates me. And I'm like, yeah, let's do this again. Let's go for the next one. So I would, the audio setup, you can, if I just had a Mac, I would just use a Mac. If I just had my iPhone, I'd just use my iPhone. I would figure out a way to make it work. I mean, the microphones we have and the cameras we have in our phones right now are so much better than what they had even, 5-10 years ago on a lot of, expensive equipment. So equipment is definitely important. Don't get me wrong, but don't use it as a crutch. Don't use it as a reason, because you can get a lot of stuff done with very little, and then you can improve upon that.
Sure, and I think that's a great point. I think the phones we have now are so ridiculous. I mean, you have better than HD video on the newer ones. You got the audio is not amazing, but as long as your mouth is close to the microphone, you can still get pretty clear audio. So I mean, there's apps you can use, right? I mean, you can get started just there, and I think people forget that no matter how much you prepare when you get on camera for the first time or when you get on, the microphone for the first time, you're probably not going to be that good, right? Because you just need to practice. You got to keep doing it. You're going to get better over time. Like you said, your flow wasn't quite there yet.
I'm still terrible. We have 24 episodes. I still don't even know what I'm doing.
Still figuring it out, right?
Yeah. But it gets a little bit better. You get better, but you also get more comfortable with feeling uncomfortable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So we talked about the setup. So the big thing I want to go into is, when you're thinking about doing something, right? So when you're coming up with the idea for this, how much of it was planned out ahead of time?
Mm-hmm.
Did you have ideas for like a format, for instance? How much of that is necessary versus the just get the thing set up and go, so to speak?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a huge planner when it comes to most things.
Yeah.
I like spreadsheets. I like notes. I like timelines, all that sort of stuff. And I still like that stuff, but 95% of the time, once the day comes or whatever, that shit goes out the window. Like
Sure.
you can plan, but then it just doesn't happen the way you plan it. So like I said, you get better at dealing with that kind of ambiguity or rolling with the punches. If you have a loose structure, that's great. I think you have to think about how you best work. If you are somebody that rolls with the punches a lot, doesn't really like the plan, that's fine. But like own up to it and realize that. And maybe you get somebody that's a really good planner to collaborate with or vice versa. But so I had some ideas for how I wanted this podcast to go, and I used examples from other podcasts. So for instance, our podcast, we start out with like a 15-20 minute monologue from Troy that's scripted. And then we go into our kind of loosely structured conversation. And I basically took the two best parts of podcasts that I really liked, and I was like, I wish this thing existed, and so let's put them together. So that was always the plan. But then as we've gone in and recorded things, we record way too much audio and then cut it down. Because we have a policy that's pretty much like, just go with it, whatever it is, whatever the joke, whatever the line, whatever how terrible it is or the direction, let's just go, we'll cut it out. Because you never know what's going to happen. And so we've uncovered some interesting things there where we get interesting emails or tweets from listeners and stuff. And so we'll be like, hey, let's talk about the top 10 ghost questions from Reddit or whatever. Or let's people really want to know about Troy's experiences since he's been in all these places. Let's really dive into those. So you just roll with it. And I really didn't know what to do exactly, but it was just kind of like, I want to get the boat moving and we'll correct course along the way. I'm so tired of sitting here doing nothing. And so each episode we might have like a different segment, or we might have a segment for 3 episodes and then I'll ditch it and I'll try something different. And looking back chronologically in my plan, like on my spreadsheet, it looks horrible because I'm like, oh, we had this plan and it didn't work. And you just can't live like that. You just have to go with it and figure it out. And say we are a successful podcast. If we have 300, 400 episodes, no one's going to remember that the first 15 were a mess. Like nobody's going to remember that. And if they do, I don't care. I'll be like, I have 275, whatever other ones that are great, that are more structured. And you always have to be evolving. And I mean, if you ever doing a project and you think like, I've hit the peak, we figured it out, that's when you die.
That's when it's done. Project's
exactly.
Over at that point,
so I just would advise people, even me back then, I wish I felt more comfortable taking that leap early on because there's no risk. I mean, there's embarrassment, but I embarrass myself all the time. And so I just get used to it. So I would just say anybody out there thinking about starting something, start it. And actually to kind of elaborate on this, I've gotten a few jobs and I've gotten notoriety for a few things because I've been that guy with all the side projects, right? So my friends and other people might be like, oh, you started this thing and it failed. You started this thing and it failed, everything. But employers are like, he does stuff. He starts stuff. He tries. And so it's paid off. Like the short-term embarrassment's paid off in the long-term employment, you know? So if you have an idea, just go for it. What's the worst that can happen? You look like me,
Yeah, that's not the worst thing in the world. Yeah. So one last question before we move on to the next segment here. And this is a little bit of a selfish question, but how do you promote it, right? So how do you get the listeners? Because I think this is probably even harder for a podcast than it is with video. And we are not getting as many, viewers and downloads as you are. So I want some advice here. What do you do?
Absolutely. Wish I could tell you. I don't know. So I fell into it a little bit like ass backwards. It really helped that Troy had a social media presence already. I mentioned earlier, he was building websites in the 90s. It was the Wild Wild West back then. The internet was a very different place. So we had a lot of domains. And he's done a lot of stuff since then, written a lot of books, done a lot of tours, done a lot of side projects and stuff to build this universe of American Hauntings. So we were able to use that clout, if you will, to kind of promote the podcast. And so we promote it through his Facebook page, his author page. And then I send out like an email every time we launch a new episode. Okay. I promote it on my Facebook page. We do some Instagram stuff. I didn't start our own Facebook page for it simply because he had a page with 22,000 likes or something. Wow, I was like, that's already better than what I could do in a year. Let's just use that. And this was also just a small piece of the American Hauntings universe. Sure. So I said, let's just use that. And I put it on the website. But to be honest, I get 1,000 clicks to the website a month, maybe. Mm-hmm. And then the email list, it grows all the time, but it's 160 something people. And most people don't listen to it through there. They listen to it through the actual iTunes app. So what we do is we beg for subscribers. We beg for reviews, and we're not shameful about it. We're just like, hey, look, like the more you review us, the better reviews we get, the higher up we show. iTunes has an interesting algorithm, in my opinion. I've never been in the back end, but when you can search for American Hauntings P, and sometimes it doesn't pop up, and it doesn't autofill. And so I think it's really, really hard. And those rates and the reviews definitely help. So every episode we ask for them, and we just say, look, if you like the show, it helps us to give a rating, give a review. And we answer every email, every tweet. We talk about people on the air sometimes that leave us reviews, leave us tweets. We're very personal about it. I think it also helps that when we started the podcast out, first, we did the cliche thing of saying, like, even if nobody listens, we'll still do it. And we meant that. But two, I didn't want it to just be two guys talking about how much they believe in ghosts. Sure. So Troy's like 80% like believes in ghosts, kind of skeptical over here with a lot of experience. I'm like 80% doesn't believe in ghosts, kind of skeptical, but we're not all polarizing. Sure. So we have a nice dynamic. And I think that presents something unique, and especially because we talk about not only the paranormal, but the history behind these places. So if you like history, you can listen to it. If you like ghosts, you can listen to it. If you like skepticism, you can listen to it. If you like hearing haunted stories, you can listen to it. So we hit a lot of things. So it's not just like, we're not just talking about one thing. We're kind of appealing to a wider audience. Gotcha. And I think that's really a big thing. But I think Troy's influence as far as an author and an internet presence has definitely grown the show much more than I could have by myself.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that's something I didn't prepare for, and it's something that I now have kind of learned that is very beneficial.
Awesome. All right. So we're going to move on in a second here. The quick takeaway I get from kind of the marketing side of this, or one thing that's come up several times is how interactive you are with the audience, right? Mm-hmm. So it sounds like that is, if you're thinking about doing something like this, making sure you're engaging with the audience, acknowledging the reviews. I think that's a big deal, asking for them. And then partnering with an influencer. I mean, obviously that's been a big boost for you. And, we kind of did that by partnering with EQ to launch the show, because obviously they have a bigger audience than we do in our personal business. So yeah, those are awesome. So I think that definitely gives me some ideas. Hopefully it gives our viewers some ideas. So we're going to move on to the last section of the show and bring Eric from Tenacity on, the bourbon father, the founder of Bourbon Friday himself. And Eric always describes our bourbon for the week and tells us a little bit about it. So welcome to the show, Eric. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot. Today we have Buffalo Trace from Buffalo Trace Distillery.
Okay, makes sense.
The reason I brought it on is I was kind of looking for a way to relate this, and Buffalo Trace actually has a ghost tour as part of their distillery tour. And Buffalo Trace Distillery has been featured on Ghost Hunters as well. There is the rumor that Colonel Blanton, who died on the estate, his ghost is still there.
Does he haunt the bourbon?
I don't know that he haunts the bourbon. He haunts the bourbon.
Is there a way to test?
There's only one way to find out.
One way to find out. We might have to drink it all.
You drink the bottle and then you find out.
Yeah, but like all of these things, especially in Kentucky, you've got the Bourbon Trail, right? Yeah. It's all going around and touring, and like Ghost Tour is very similar. I stayed when I was in Bardstown, which is the bourbon capital of the world, is what their claim to fame. I stayed in the Jailer's Inn, which is this bed and breakfast. Well, I stayed in one of the jail cells that had been converted into a bedroom.
Really?
And so like the whole building, it's like the old jail is out front, the newer jail is in back. But we're talking 18th century, 19th century jail cells.
Wow.
I didn't really experience anything, but there were, like, the next morning, people were telling me, oh, yeah, we definitely heard this and that. Then we went on the tour. We went into one of these jail cells, and they closed the door. And I'll admit, it felt a little bit weird. I think it had to do with being in a 19th century jail cell. The woman that happened to be with me she felt a vibe and really wanted to get out of the jail cell.
Right.
Wow, that's amazing. Every week he's got a brilliant way of tying the bourbon into the conversation. I love it.
Yeah, that works for me, man.
So I think the last kind of topic or question we wanted to go over today was something that's actually come up several times in our conversation already, and it's the idea of how to know when to start, and in particular, how to just get started when you're reluctantly dragging your feet. And I think that almost everyone I've ever talked to that has started a podcast or thought about starting a podcast, they thought about it for years. I mean, this is something where they were, oh yeah, 3 years ago I thought it was a great idea for a podcast, and they just haven't started yet, right?
And you even start buying equipment.
Yeah.
And still don't start.
They got $5,000 worth of stuff that they bought over the years.
Yeah.
Just crazy stuff, right?
Yeah.
And even I have recorded 4 episodes of the podcast and not actually published them. So, I'm one of these people right now, right? I started 2 live shows in the meantime, so I think I've done some.
All right,
things,
yeah,
right?
you've redeemed yourself a little bit.
I could just record the audio of this, and then it's my podcast, I guess. But how did you take the plunge, or I guess what are some advice we could give people that are sitting out there thinking, man, I've been thinking about this for a while, and they're just dragging their feet. What did you do to get past that?
I wish I knew, honestly. Like I said, I think it's a Reid Hoffman thing where, like, if you're not embarrassed by your first product or whatever, you've launched too late. Like,
sure.
I never felt ready to do this thing, and I don't think this is a big thing, right? There are bigger things going on, but it's big for me. It's one of the biggest things I've done. I never felt right. I still don't feel right. I feel like I'm still kind of a fraud and figuring it out, tripping over my feet week after week, trying to figure this stuff out. If I felt comfortable, I don't know if I'll ever feel comfortable doing it. Sure. I think I wanted it. I have this problem where I ruin every side project I have by trying to turn it into a business, and I don't enjoy it anymore because I try to make money off of it because it's just how my brain's wired. And so this one, I was like, no, I'm not going to make money. I'm just going to have fun. And it's been the most successful side project I've had. So I think there is something to that, do what you love and all that stuff. But I still agonize over it.
Sure.
And recording that first episode, it was so clunky and awkward, and I hated it. I hated doing it. It was so weird. And then trying to edit it and put it out there, I was like, this is terrible. Okay, send. And people responded, positively. And it was only a couple at first, but I was like, okay, this isn't so bad. Let's do it again. And so I did another one, and they get a little bit better and a little bit better. Then they got worse, but then they exponentially get better. I don't know. I wish I had like a magic mantra or something to tell people to be like, take that leap. But
because this is something, you said you have a lot of side projects, so you have a tendency to just kind of do. Right?
I have to do, idle hands, the devil's playpen kind of thing.
You're bored all the time.
I'm always bored. I'm bored and I'm anxious, so I always have to be doing something.
I'm gonna start something new.
And so, but I don't always release the things. I'm kind of like you. How many companies I've launched and things that haven't never seen the light of day. I wish I knew what to tell people to be like, hey, just go out and do it. But there's no magic point. You're not going to feel good. You're not going to have an epiphany. Just do it. Do one episode, see what happens.
Sure.
And I often find it like almost all my work is project work, and I'll put it off and put it off and put it off. And then I finally get into it. Like, I got to think about this. I finally get into it, and I find, this is way easier. Or I'm done way faster.
Right.
Or this is way better than I could have ever imagined. And just sort of that apprehension of just getting started, I think, it really inhibits all of us, I think. But
that build up to getting started, I think it's both apprehension and it's also excitement.
Yeah.
And then sometimes when you take the leap, you'll get a little bit into it, and then you're kind of like, hey, this isn't exciting anymore as I want it to be. So there's always issues and waves and stuff, but I don't know, find what that motivation is and keep going. And I still have problems. Like, I hang on every review that we get, whether it's positive or negative, and I know that's a fault. And so I try not to, but I have a good time doing what I'm doing, and I like to learn. And so I just keep going with it. I wish I could bottle this and give it to myself in other forms, but I can't.
Yeah.
So just go for
your
it.
Strengths and weaknesses.
Just go for it. Yeah.
I think the one thing that stands out to me about people are afraid of being mocked.
For sure.
Right? They're afraid, the thing is, like, if the first episode isn't good enough, like, people are going to make fun of me, or they're going to be mean, or are going to get bad reviews. And I think that what they forget is that we all kind of respect the person that just gets out there and tries things, right? And we will judge them once they've done it for a while, because we all figure like, well, you get a few shots, then you better figure it out.
Right.
But I like across the board, every time, like, so we do, a lot of our clients will do like 3 or 4 social media videos that we'll make all at one time, and then we'll post them once a week, right? And the first video almost always just completely kills it, right?
Yeah.
Because they post it, everybody says super nice things, they get tons of likes, tons of engagement.
It's new.
No one ever says anything mean, and you can always tell that like within a day of posting, and when I post, like they are nervous, like they're like frowning and scared, and within a day they're like excited and they're texting us like, oh, this is so cool. And I think more people just need to recognize that like there's just such a respect for doing things, right?
Absolutely.
That first couple times you put something out, like you're gonna get appreciation for just trying, right?
Yep.
And then I think the second thing, one thing I really like about live video, and I emphasize to a lot of people, is once you click the start button, and then you click start, it's already posted, and then you make the content, right? So it's kind of a way to hack your brain a little in that sense, that it's like, because I think there's so many people that, like I did, will make the content and then not post it, right? You're talking about hitting the send button is kind of the hardest part. And that's with live, right? Once you click it, you're going.
And I know like Jonathan from EQ had been trying to get me to do a podcast forever. And I was just like, no. And then here I am sitting on a live Facebook show.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah.
I like that. I think it's a lot about yourself and you hack those sort of things. So it's like if you're nervous to put something out, make it live, so you have to put it out, and you work. You be very self-aware about how you operate, and then you play yourself a little bit, to make those things happen.
Yep. And I think, to sum it up, it all comes down to that classic question of like, when you're lying on your deathbed at 90, what do you want to look back and think about your life, right? Do you want to get over your nerves and take a couple shots and take some chances, or do you want to regret it for the rest of your life? Right?
It's fine to strike out as long as you take some swings.
Absolutely. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you, Cody. Thank you, Eric, for joining us
today. Thank you for having me, man. I appreciate it.
I do want to thank Jay with EQ for stepping in and being our producer for the week. That was definitely helpful, and we appreciate that. We do, obviously we thank EQ for putting the show on. We thank T-Rex for giving us the space here and providing us with an awesome setup for the Bourbon Friday show. I'm Nick Niehaus with Connect Marketing. I'm the host. We go live every Friday at 4:30. Make sure to check us out next week, and thanks for tuning in this week.